So with devices, we knew that we were going to be introducing devices for our Year 9 students in 2015, which meant that we had the whole of 2014 to address development of staff, thinking about what the pitfalls and the positives would be about using devices in the classroom, and to also structure the professional development so that we had a great deal of empowerment by our teachers across the board. We're talking about 150 teachers, not all of whom are going to be teaching Year 9s in 2015, but what was going to happen in 2015 was that the devices that the Year 9 students would bring would be the thin end of the wedge. There would be students in Year 11, 12, 13 and 10 who would bring devices along as well, and teachers would have to be ready for those sorts of situations where 4 or 5 kids would come into the classroom with a device and the expectation that they might be able to use them. So we had policies that enabled the device use in the classroom, but we hadn't really unpacked the pedagogy that went with it. And at the same time, we wanted to use this device PD to empower leadership. So what we did was we created a group of people called the device leaders, and these leaders' role, and they didn't have to be experts in using devices. In fact, the PD that we bought in, that was provided for these leaders, was PD that took them from knowing not very much at all to, by the end of the year, knowing quite a bit about how you use devices, what the potential was and so on. Now, we're a Mac school, but we knew that students coming in 2015 were not necessarily going to be having an iPad. They may have a device that's an Android device or a Surface tablet or whatever. So we had to be flexible enough to cope with that. So we employed a person to work with those leaders. There were 16 of them, and the leaders in terms role was to run sessions with their departments to show them the sorts of potential that iPads could offer for them. It actually meant that they had the session with the professional who was taking them through a session for 2 or 3 hours, looking at the iPad and what it can do and how you manage it in the classroom. And then those leaders went back to their departments and in turn provided their departments with snapshots from the sorts of PD that they'd attended. We encouraged at the same time a scheme whereby staff members were able to get a subsidy towards the purchase of an iPad that encouraged more iPads to be in the hands of staff members so that they could practice and play with an iPad during the course of this lead-in year with a view to changing what they did if they were teaching a Year 9 in 2015. So you have 2 aspects to the professional development model. You have this notion that you have some lead teachers, and that's those people who we perceived had leadership ability to share what they had learnt in an intensive session with the rest of their colleagues. And then we had this notion of getting familiarity with a device where you're going to have 30 students sitting in front of you in 2015 who are going to be using these devices. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have those people who are a little bit tentative, wary, unsure about the pedagogy that sits alongside having 30 kids in front of them with devices. That's certainly correct, certainly true. And so what we tried to do is to also run sessions periodically that had those leaders running sessions in little workshops within a staff meeting time. So it meant that those people who were a little bit negative or unsure or lacking in confidence about the use of an iPad or a device themselves were able to see that the potential was going to be pretty positive, and that the management of a class load of those people with them was not going to be such a fraught issue, and that had been an issue that had been raised previously. So you see very straightforwardly that we have a system where not only are they learning and the leaders are then sharing that learning with their departments, but we're also sending the message out to everyone that this is a major focus from our professional development this year, and the evidence that we can see in, I guess, people starting to think about and even using individually the iPads and the devices with their classes is evidence that people are starting to take up the notion